The night was quiet, until it wasn't. Flashing red and blue lights painted the dark street as a black man stepped out of his car, his hands raised, his face calm. He had done nothing wrong, but that didn't matter to the officer storming toward him. "Get on the ground." The cop barked, his voice laced with aggression. Confused but compliant, the man barely had a chance to speak before a swift kick sent him to the pavement. The officer didn't ask questions. He didn't check IDs. He assumed, and that assumption led to a moment he would regret forever. Because the man lying on the ground, hands cuffed behind his back, wasn't just anyone, he was the city's police chief. Now the question is, what happens when the tables turn? When the truth comes out, stay tuned, because this officer's worst nightmare is just beginning. The officer tightened the cuffs, his grip firm as he pulled the man to his feet. "You think you can just ignore my commands?" he snapped, shoving him toward the squad car. The man winced but stayed silent, his sharp eyes locked onto the officer's face. He could feel the weight of the moment, the dangerous mix of power and prejudice. But still, he said nothing. Other officers arrived, their radios buzzing with updates. One of them glanced at the man in cuffs, his expression shifting from routine to something closer to alarm. "Wait, who is he?" he asked under his breath. The arresting officer scoffed. "Some guy who thought he was above the law." But as the pieces started coming together, tension filled the air. The realization was creeping in, slow but unstoppable. Something wasn't right, and soon the officer would find out just how badly he had messed up. As the officer shoved the man into the back of the squad car, the chief finally spoke. "You should really check my ID," he said, his voice calm but firm. The officer smirked. "Oh yeah. And who do you think you are?" he mocked, slamming the door shut. Meanwhile, a younger officer stood nearby, shifting uncomfortably. He had seen the chief before, at department meetings, on the news, shaking hands with the mayor. Something wasn't adding up. He hesitated, then leaned toward his partner. "Hey, maybe we should run his name first." The officer waved him off. "I don't need to check anything. I know a criminal when I see one." Back at the station, word started spreading. Officers whispered, glancing toward the holding cell. The booking sergeant froze mid-typing, his eyes widening at the name on the screen. Outside, the arresting officer was still smug, completely unaware that his entire world was about to turn upside down. The police station buzzed with quiet tension as officers exchanged uncertain glances. The booking sergeant swallowed hard before looking up at the arresting officer. "You might want to take a look at this," he said, turning the screen around. The officer barely glanced at it. "Just book him," he muttered. But the sergeant didn't move. "No, you don't understand." Something about his tone made the officer finally lean in, and that's when he saw it. The name, the title. His heart skipped a beat, his stomach dropped. A cold sweat formed on his forehead as he turned to look toward the holding cell. The man, his prisoner, stood tall, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp. The same man he had shoved, cuffed, and humiliated was his boss. The room felt smaller. The whispers grew louder. Panic started creeping in, because now there was only one question left. What happens next? The officer's hands felt clammy as he stepped back from the screen. His mind raced, searching for a way out of the mess he had just created. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Release him. Now." Everyone turned to see the captain standing at the entrance, his face tight with barely contained anger. The arresting officer hesitated, but the chief, still behind the bars, raised a hand. "No," he said calmly. "Let's do this the right way." The room went silent. No one knew what he meant. Then, in a shocking twist, the chief took a step forward and said, "Press the charges." Gasps filled the station. The officer's stomach twisted. What?" he stammered. "You heard me," the chief said. "I want to see how the system works when the person in cuffs has a badge." The officer's breath hitched. He had thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The station fell into stunned silence. The chief stood tall, his calm stare locking onto the officer who had arrested him. The weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud. No one had expected this. The arresting officer's face drained of color. He had spent years making quick assumptions, never imagining he'd one day be forced to defend them, especially not against the very system he thought he understood. His hands clenched at his sides. "Sir, I..." But the chief shook his head. No excuses, no shortcuts. Let's see if the law works the same when the badge is on the other side. The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "Chief, are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure." As the officer was led toward an internal investigation hearing, he realized something chilling. This wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about exposing a broken system. And it had only just begun. Days later, the department was still shaken. The investigation moved quickly, uncovering not just one officer's actions, but a pattern of unchecked behavior. The arresting officer, now facing disciplinary action, sat quietly in the review room, his confidence shattered. He had spent years enforcing laws, but now, for the first time, he was forced to truly understand them. The chief never raised his voice, never demanded revenge. He didn't have to. His actions had already sent a message louder than words. Change wasn't just about one incident, it was about accountability, about making sure this never happened again. As the chief walked out of the station, free and unshaken, a reporter called out, "What do you want people to take from this?" He paused, then simply said, "Justice should look the same for everyone." And with that, he stepped into the night, leaving behind a department forever changed.